Welcome back. What's it like to work during the month of Ramadan? In Muslim-majority countries, Ramadan is a festive and relaxed time. People have shortened workdays so that they can rest, engage in worship, and spend time with family and friends. Not so in the West. Most Muslims living in the West continue their daily routines while fasting. What impact does the month of Ramadan have on the workplace? How can Muslims enjoy Ramadan while fulfilling their obligations at work? And how can employers be supportive of their fasting employees? Dr. Shabir Ali, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
It's my pleasure to be on.
Dr. Shabir Ali, an organization called Working Muslim has put out two guides, one for employers and one for employees, and we both had a chance to look at these guides. So tell me a little bit about what you've learned.
Yes, and I have the guide for employers here. It's a short read. Not a lot of text, nicely done with beautiful images. There are very important tips both for employers and employees, what we need to understand about the work environment during the month of Ramadan. So first, for employees, what do you do? Now you're fasting and you're working at the same time. How do you balance these two obligations? Mm-hmm. Well, some of the tips include eating right so that you have sufficient energy to carry out your work responsibilities. In addition to what the guides specifically say, we can add more generally that it is important for Muslims to recognize that while they are required to fast, Ramadan itself may have a number of things going with it, usually, and the employee does not have to necessarily participate in all of those things. For example, there could be long community gatherings in the mosques where people enjoy themselves, they enjoy the festive season for Muslims. If you have the obligation to work next day, then you have to limit the time you spend in leisure and such joyful activity.
Mm-hmm. There's also the long prayer at night.
True. And the long prayer at night, which is referred to as the Taraweeh prayers, are considered by most scholars to be voluntary. There are some scholars, especially from the Hanafi school, who consider it to be a sunnah mu'akkada and emphasize sunnah to the extent that they say if you neglect it, then you're a sinner for neglecting it. But the proof for that position is very weak. The stronger position seems to be that it is voluntary. It is interesting that many years ago when I traveled with the Jamaat Tabligh, we used to read a book called Tabligh Nisab, translated into English under the title Teachings of Islam, or Fazail A'mal. Sometimes it retains an Urdu title. And in the section dealing with the virtues of Ramadan, it says that the Prophet, peace be upon him, delivered a sermon in which he spoke about this night prayer. And in the Arabic text, it says that God has made the night prayer of Ramadan for you tatawwu, which means voluntary. And in the English translation, it says that God has made it compulsory. So there is a vast difference here between the English translation and the original Arabic, and the original Arabic shows that it is actually voluntary, but the translators of the book somehow couldn't get their heads around the idea that it is voluntary, and they wanted to somehow insist that it is compulsory. Or
it's
that
great that you're saying that, because sometimes
Muslims
feel extremely overwhelmed. You know, they're trying to juggle a number of different commitments, and they put aside everything else and they devote themselves to worship, forgetting about the other commitments. But it seems like what you're saying is that we do have an obligation to work and to fulfill our work responsibilities well.
True.
At the same time.
Exactly. Another thing about the night prayer is that there is a difference of opinion among the scholars as to whether 8 rakats of the night prayer, 8 cycles of prayer complete the lot, or whether you have to complete 20 cycles. And some again insist on 20 cycles, and the arguments go both ways. And when you have things like this being disputed among great scholars, you realize that the solution is not clear, because if the solution was very clear, there'd be no dispute among the scholars. I mean, there might be some people who don't like to pray 20, and they say, well, just give me 8. I'm happy with the 8. I don't want to do any more, right? They're just following the desires, perhaps. But when great scholars are saying, no, when we look at the evidence, it's very clear that it should be 8, you realize that you can't insist on any one number. It could be either one, and you just have to have that flexibility flexibility and allow for both. If some people want to pray 20, that's up to them. If some want to pray 8, that's up to them. Well, it's really up to them to follow the scholars that they trust to be giving the right rulings on this. But at the end of the day, when we step back and see the big picture and we realize that great scholars are on this, the two sides of this divide, we cannot ourselves be dogmatic. And it's, if one needs to go to work next day, then if the 8 rakats become more attractive for that reason, then one shouldn't feel guilty about that, because it is actually mentioned that when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was faced with 2 permissible alternatives, he picked the easier of the 2. Now, Ramadan is a time for worship, true, but we worship God in many different ways. And going to work, according to one interpretation of what is meant by ibadah or worship in Islam, going to work actually is included in that. If we take worship in the broader sense of living a life that is pleasing to God, well, going to work also is included, and in fact is a necessary part for able-bodied persons. We're not allowed to just sit back, relax, do nothing, and enjoy life. We need to be active and productive citizens, benefiting other people and benefiting ourselves. A man came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and asked for charity, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave him an axe. So that was a lesson, an indication for him that he should go out and work. And he went out and he cut wood and sold that until that became his profession. He did not need to beg for charity anymore. And it is reported that the Prophet, peace be upon him, praised labor by saying that some of the great prophets in the past were in fact laborers as well. So one should not look down on manual labor. And he recommended that we give charity, and if a person had nothing to give, his recommendation is that you should work, so you should earn something for your own upkeep, and then you'll have something to give in charity as well. So
work is a noble thing.
Is a noble thing, and to do that in the month of Ramadan, every noble act is rewarded much more in the month of Ramadan. So Muslims should work during the month of Ramadan as in other months as well.
Now, what is your advice to an employer who wants to, understand Muslims and maybe help them and be supportive of them in the month of Ramadan?
Well, an employer should be aware, or it will be helpful if the employer is aware that Ramadan is here, that Muslims, especially devout ones, will be observing the fast from morning till evening. When it comes to the evening time, and it is meal time for Muslims, it'll be nice if the employers can allow for a break at that time, since the usual lunch break would be of no use to the Muslim for the matter of dining. And since it'll be beneficial for the employer to have employees with energy coming from their food, well then it is reasonable to allow them time to eat when it is time to break their fast at sunset. If it so happens that somebody's working the evening shift, because if they're working during the day, that may not matter. Now, because the lunch hour is of very little use for eating for the Muslim, a 1 hour lunch break may be more than the Muslim needs, and perhaps a Muslim would prefer to have a shorter lunch break just to recuperate from maybe the redundancy of work or the monotony of work, and to come back fresh. And then the half an hour saved then could lead to an earlier dismissal at the end of the day. So the employer is free to go off earlier and be able to relax at the end of the day. It might be useful for the employer, according to the Working Muslim Guide, for the employer not to schedule working lunches for the Muslim employee who is known to be fasting. Now, having said that, I don't want Muslim employees to seem like high maintenance employees during the month of Ramadan. A Muslim employee should be prepared to carry out his and her responsibilities in the normal course of events, as normally happens. Of course, the Muslim wouldn't be allowed to eat during the month of Ramadan, so if there is a working lunch, a Muslim employee can still sit with his co-workers who are having lunch, or sit with a customer who is having lunch. Of course, the customer may not be very happy knowing that
make an awkward situation, right?
Exactly. But the point is that I don't want this to seem like we're saying that the Muslim employee has the right to somehow opt out of obligations at work. It should be things that are done by mutual consultation, by mutual understanding, such that the benefit to the employer that normally ensues from the employee's work should not diminish during the month of Ramadan. In fact, the employee should be more conscious of his or her obligations in the month of Ramadan, and part of his or her obligations is to do what is required as the other side of earning a salary. You earn a salary, now your responsibility is to fulfill your obligations and your duties due to which you're getting the salary. It cannot be that you just receive your salary, you punch your clock showing your existence, but you didn't do anything to earn that salary. A Muslim concept is that to earn your salary, you must actually do the work that is assigned to you.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Shabir Ali.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, we will answer questions we received from you, our viewers.